जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शतश्री श्रीमद् दिवांग सभाचरण अरविंद भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। श्री श्री राधा गोपीनाथ भगवान की जय। निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवती उत्तमा श्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto number 4, Chapter 8, Dhruva Maharaj leaves home, text number 34. Gunadikan mudam lipsed, Gunadikan mudam lipsed, Anukrosham gunadamat, Anukrosham gunadamat, Maitrim samanadan vichen, Maitrim samanadan vichen, Natapair abhibhuyate, Natapair abhibhuyate, Gunadikan mudam lipsed, Anukrosham gunadamat, Maitrim samanadan vichen, Natapair abhibhuyate, Gunadikan mudam lipsed, Anukrosham gunadamat, Maitrim samanadan vichen, Natapair abhibhuyate. Natapair abhibhuyate. Gunadikan mudam lipset, Anukrosham gunadamat, Maitrim samanadan vichen, Natapair abhibhuyate. Gunadikam mudam lipset, Anukrosham gunadamat, Maitrim samanadan vichen, Natapair abhibhuyate. Gunadikan mudam lipset, Anukrosham gunadamat, Natapair anubhuyate. Anukrosham gunadamat, Maitrim samanadan vichen, Natapair abhibhuyate. Adikan mudam lipset Vipocha gunadaman Etim samanadan vichen Abhibhuyate. Word for word translation. Gunadikat, one who's more qualified. Mudam, pleasure. Lipset, one should feel. Anukrosham, compassion. Gunadamat, one who is less qualified. Maitrim, friendship. Samanat, with an equal. Anvichet, one should desire. Na, not. Tapahi, by tribulation. Abhibhuyate, becomes affected. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Abhay Chanaravinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, Jagadguru Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation: every man should act like this. When he meets a person more qualified than himself, he should be very pleased. When he meets someone less qualified than himself, he should be compassionate toward him. And when he meets someone equal to himself, he should make friendship with him. In this way, one is never affected by the threefold miseries of this material world. Please repeat after me. Every man should act like this. When he meets a person more qualified than himself, he should be very pleased. When he meets someone less qualified than himself, he should be compassionate toward him. And when he meets someone equal to himself, he should make friendship with him. In this way, one is never affected by the threefold miseries of this material world. Purport: generally, when we find someone more qualified than ourselves, we become envious of him. And when we find someone less qualified, we deride him. And when we find someone equal, we become very proud of our activities. These are the causes of all material tribulations. The great sage Narada therefore advised that a devotee should act perfectly. Instead of being envious of a more qualified man, one should be jolly to receive him. Instead of being oppressive to a less qualified man, one should be compassionate toward him, just to raise him to the proper standard. And when one meets an equal, instead of being proud of one's activities before him, one should treat him as a friend. One should also have some compassion for the people in general who are suffering due to forgetfulness of Krishna. These important functions will make one happy within this material world. Translation again: every man should act like this. When he meets a person more qualified than himself, he should be very pleased. When he meets someone less qualified than himself, he should be compassionate toward him. And when he meets someone equal to himself, he should make friendship with him. In this way, one is never affected by the threefold miseries of this material world. Om Gyanatimirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare, Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Yat Pipatamaham. Hare Krishna. So, after Dhruva Maharaj left the palace and met Nard Muni in the forest. Nard Muni has given him some instructions, and Prabhupada says that this is to test him, to see the level of his determination. Yesterday we heard from Shivan Prabhu about how Nard Muni had told Dhruva Maharaj one should try to keep himself satisfied in any condition of life, whether distress or happiness, which is offered by the Supreme Will. A person endures in this way is able to cross over the darkness of omniscience very easily. So Narada Muni is giving instructions to Dhruva Maharaj so that he may overcome this feeling of insult or offense against him, so that he may come to the sober state of mind and then go back home, back to his mother. But as we will see, Dhruva Maharaj will admit to Narad Muni that, you see, your instructions you've given me, that is all well and good. In fact, it's for my best welfare. But unfortunately, due to my Kshatriya nature, I'm not able to follow. I'm not able to give up the insult. So therefore, I want a kingdom even greater than my great-grandfather. Because Dhruva Maharaj's father is Uttanapad. Uttanapad's father is Swayambhuv Manu, and Swayambhuv Manu's father is Lord Brahma. So his great-grandfather is the owner of Satyaloka. So to have something even greater than Satyaloka was Dhruva Maharaj's desire. And so Narad Muni, it's mentioned later on that he actually out of compassion started to instruct Dhruva Maharaj how to perform devotional service. But a particular type of devotional service that involved him chanting the holy name of the Lord, but also performing other activities. So you can see even Narad Muni is following his own instructions. There's something known as Achar and there's something known as Prachar. When Mahaprabhu was in Puri, at that time all his devotees came, most of the devotees came and joined him in Puri, most of his intimate associates. The other half ended up staying in Navadvip and preached Krishna consciousness and came and saw Mahaprabhu doing Ratha Yatra and the Chaturmasya. So it's mentioned that at one particular point in time, Sanatana Goswami decided to go and visit Mahaprabhu. So at this particular time, he leaves Vrindavan because he had already met Mahaprabhu in, I think it's Varanasi, and he goes to Vrindavan, and Mahaprabhu goes back to Puri. And so at one particular point in time, Sanatana Goswami decides to visit Mahaprabhu in Puri, and he decides to go through Jharikand forest because actually in the end of the pastime, this particular pastime of Sanatana Goswami visiting Mahaprabhu in Jagannath Puri, it's mentioned there that he actually asked Balabhadra Bhattacharya, the personal servant of Mahaprabhu, who went with Mahaprabhu to Vrindavan and then back, where the places Mahaprabhu stayed, where he went. And there Prabhupada writes, actually for a pure devotee, to stay in any of the places for a short period of time or a long period of time is a great desire. The place where Mahaprabhu stayed, Mahaprabhu traveled. So he decides to go through Jharikand forest, and while he visits Jharikand forest, he unfortunately drinks some water that's a little contaminated because he's a renunciate, and he simply sustained or subsisted on the fruits and roots and water of the forest. So at this particular point in time, he contracted some sores over his body because of drinking this contaminated water, some sort of virus. And these open sores, they constantly oozed some pus and some blood and other bodily fluids. And it was a cause of discomfort. But for Sanatana Goswami, thinking about visiting Mahaprabhu, that overwhelmed any sort of discomfort that he felt. Sometimes I remember when I first started Krishna consciousness, or when I first started coming to the temple, I remember whenever I come to the temple through public transport, you'd have to come up the hill to see Radha Gopinath. And I was so lazy, and I would always think that, this hill is so big, we have to go make it all the way. But I would remember that after a whole week of staying away from the temple, the devotees and everything,
And when I'd be making my way to the temple, I'd be thinking that, this will happen, that festival will happen, and then this Sunday feast would happen. And then by the time I realized it, I'd be at the temple already. So in that way, that's just a small glimpse of what Sanatana Goswami felt when he was on his way to visit Mahaprabhu. And we'll see later on the same mood Mahaprabhu wanted to glorify to the whole world that Sanatana Goswami had of his level of pure devotion, his loving service to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So when he comes and visits Mahaprabhu, of course there's a lot of interaction, but the point I wanted to come to was that after Mahaprabhu meets Sanatana Goswami for the first time, Sanatana Goswami actually goes and visits and stays with Haridas Thakur. It's mentioned that when Mahaprabhu first came to Puri, Haridas Thakur was there. And Haridas Thakur, he felt extremely fallen because of his birth in a Muslim family. And he had told Mahaprabhu that, just see my fallen condition. I can't even come near the devotees of Jagannath Puri because of how fallen I am. So please arrange my residence. And so Mahaprabhu arranged his residence a bit further away from Jagannath Puri temple, in a very secluded place, just close to his own residence. And it's mentioned that Haridas Thakur would always take darshan of the Sudarshana Chakra. He would never enter the temple, because even at that point in time, that so-called social custom was there, that they wouldn't allow anyone except Hindus. So, and also more importantly was Haridas Thakur's overwhelming sense of humility. So Sanatana Goswami also felt the same way. Rupa Goswami also felt the same way, because they had felt we had given up all our devotional activities, our qualities of Brahmanical qualities, to take the service of a mlecha, a meat eater, I guess a person who doesn't follow the Vedic customs. So they felt themselves extremely contaminated. So even Sanatana Goswami would never come near the temple of Jagannath Puri. So he stayed with Haridas Thakur. And when he appeared there, at that time Mahaprabhu also appeared after performing his midday, I believe after he performed his morning duties, he comes and visits Haridas Thakur. And there he saw Sanatana Goswami. And Sanatana Goswami paid obeisances from a distance. Not just because of his humility, but the fact that he had sores all over his body. And he knew that just see how useless my body is, that I cannot perform any devotional service to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu without feeling some discomfort. And I know when I see Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he will embrace me. So what is the use of this body? All of this pus will then smear all over the transcendental body of the Lord. And that will be a great disservice. So while he was walking down from Jharkhand to Puri, he was thinking, you know what I will do? I think the best thing for this is that for me to have a pure, uncontaminated body to serve Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, is better I give this one up. So he thought when Jagannath Ratha Yatra happens, at that time while seeing Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Lord Jagannath, I will immediately jump in front of the wheels of the Rath cart, and then I will give up this useless material body. So with this mood, he appears in Haridas Thakur's residence. And Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu sees Sanatana Goswami paying obeisances from a distance. And immediately he comes and embraces Sanatana Goswami. But Sanatana Goswami is backing up. He's immediately backing up, saying, Mahaprabhu, my dear Lord, don't touch me, don't touch me. And Mahaprabhu, feeling great ecstasy, immediately embraces Srila Sanatana Goswami. And it's mentioned there that there's a couple of talks between them. If I go through this whole pastime, I don't think I'll be able to explain it anymore. But it's mentioned there that Mahaprabhu tells Sanatana Goswami, you stay here with Haridas Thakur, and you stay in his association and talk Krishna Katha. And he leaves. And it's mentioned in this particular instance that Haridas Thakur starts glorifying Sanatana Goswami. Just see a wonderful position, how much Mahaprabhu is giving you so much mercy. And so Sanatana Goswami doesn't just simply take that. He then uses that and glorifies Haridas Thakur. And he says that, my dear sir, there are many people who perform preaching work, prachar, but their personal activities, their achar, their behavior is not up to the same mark. And there are many who have very great personal behavior, but their preaching is not up to the standard. But we see in you, my dear sir, both achar and prachar to the unlimited degree, to the nth degree. And so this way Sanatana Goswami is praising Haridas Thakur. And you can see that even Narada Muni is following in this same way. That when one meets someone less qualified than himself, he should be compassionate toward him. And so when Narada Muni saw Dhruva Maharaj in such a dilemma, because he's giving instructions, right? It's mentioned in Mahabharata after Duryodhana had sent the Pandavas to the forest after the gambling match. It's mentioned there at one particular point in time that they had found out that the Pandavas were staying in one forest called Dvaitavan. And so they were desiring to go and flaunt their wealth to the Pandavas. Just, this is the crooked nature of Duryodhana and his friends. They wanted to inflict pain upon the Pandavas and show them, just see, you're living in the forest like mendicants with just tree bark and emaciated with not much food. And look at us, how we're living the grand Kshatriya life. And just before this happens, it's mentioned that Markandeya Rishi enters the assembly, where Dhritarashtra, all the Kuru elders, including Duryodhana, Karna and everyone are there. And it's mentioned that Markandeya Rishi, he explains to Dhritarashtra the situation of the Pandavas. And he explains that it is best that you give these Pandavas back what they deserve. It is still within your power as the emperor of the Kuru dynasty. And then he sees Duryodhana there seething, because Duryodhana, whenever he hears glorification of the Pandavas, he just can't tolerate it. And so it's mentioned he's just looking openly at Markandeya Rishi with hot eyes. And Markandeya Rishi feeling compassionate for him. Why does Markandeya Rishi feel compassionate? Because unnecessarily he's causing himself more pain, thinking in such a negative way for the Pandavas. Because the Pandavas are not feeling any pain by him doing such. Feeling anger, feeling pain, hot eyes, all of these things. That is just a self-inflicted pain of Duryodhana. And in fact, for the future, Markandeya could see the past, present, future being Trikala Gyan. He also saw the destruction of Duryodhana. So out of compassion, he told them, my dear son. He used all affectionate words, trying to cajole him to accept the Pandavas. And what Duryodhana did was that he just simply sighed very loudly. He lifted his dhoti, showed his thigh, slapped his thigh, and then he started looking elsewhere. And so Markandeya Rishi got extremely upset, extremely angry. Not for himself, but the fact that Duryodhana was not able to accept even the smallest cajoling words. So therefore Markandeya Rishi, out of his compassion, had to show through anger. And he told Duryodhana that if you don't return the Pandavas what they rightly deserve, then you will face destruction. And Dhritarashtra, feeling alarmed, tried to pacify Markandeya Rishi. And Markandeya Rishi said that unless he gives what the Pandavas deserve, then he'll only meet destruction. Because the Pandavas are protected by Bhima, who is able to kill such and such demons. And so Dhritarashtra's interest was piqued. Then he asked, so who are these demons that Bhima killed? Because these demons were so popular, infamous rather, that nobody were able to subdue them. And Markandeya Rishi tells Dhritarashtra that due to the insult that your son has given, I will no longer speak in this assembly. And he leaves. And he says some other Rishi will come. So the point here is that you can see that Narada Muni feeling that Dhruva Maharaj, he's telling very humbly back to Narada Muni, please, I can't follow your instructions. And so Narada Muni compassionately gives him instructions on how to come out of his dilemma. That he may simultaneously be able to fulfill his material desires, but more so, attain his eternal position as a servant of Shri Radha Gopinath. So then, we see this situation in another case in Srimad Bhagavatam. Can anyone remember? Where the recipient or the person who's begging for any material benediction is unable to follow the spiritual path, and therefore the benefactor has to give them some sort of method in which they may be able to satisfy the desire but also progress spiritually. Can anyone think of an example of Srimad Bhagavatam? Yeah. Can you explain a bit more? Anyone else? Anything else you can think of in Srimad Bhagavatam? Any other literature? Any other shastra? No other ideas? Okay, we'll take the example of Diti and Kashyapa. There's also Aditi and Kashyapa as well. But Aditi's motive was more to get the Supreme Personality of Godhead, her son. So it doesn't really quite apply to this material desire. But, okay, I'll explain both side by side. So Diti desired to have a son to kill Indra. And it's mentioned that at the end of her, did she also get the Payavrata? She didn't. She also practiced Payavrata, or that was Aditi? I can't remember. But the when she had performed her devotional service, actually at one particular point in time, Indra came and offered services, hoping to see some deficiency or defect in her service, so that he may be able to prevent her from begetting a son or a child that would kill him. And as you know, later on, Aditi at one particular point lapsed. She didn't wash her mouth after eating or something like that. And Indra entered her womb and cut it into 49 pieces, which ended up becoming the Maruts. And so then Indra, anyway, at the end of the pastime, everything was satisfied. He offered his obeisances and asked for forgiveness from Aditi. And then he accepted the Maruts as his brothers and took them as demigods. So that's an example of where a devotee comes forward and provides somewhat a process by which one will become purified to be able to accept devotional service and come to the platform of pure loving service of the Lord, rejecting the material desire. And we see that in Dhruva Maharaj's case here. So we can take this verse in two different ways. One, we can take the perspective of the situation in which Dhruva Maharaj is feeling, or in the situation of our practice of devotional service. Of course, there are many perspectives, but we'll take these two for now. If we take it from the perspective of Dhruva Maharaj, put yourself in Dhruva Maharaj's shoes. You've already heard so many times about how Dhruva Maharaj is feeling insulted, how he is feeling great pain in heart, and how he wanted to exact revenge on his stepmother. So, for someone like that, hearing these words, how do you think he would have felt? He would have felt discomfort. He would have felt that this doesn't really apply to him. Because if you see in the previous verse, Narad Muni is telling him you should be satisfied in all situations, whether happiness or distress. And that's directly telling him, give up your false sense of, shut your nature. This feeling of insult, give it up. I don't know if you have felt it, but sometimes I also have felt it before. When you're feeling great anger towards someone and someone is trying to pacify you, how do you feel? Depends on your level of anger, right? It depends on you. But if it's intense anger, how do you feel? I remember one time I had just come to Krishna consciousness, and I remember I had an argument with someone, and I remember messaging Ganashampu saying that, I'm feeling great anger towards this person, what should I do? And he sent me a message and said, just chant Hare Krishna. And I was thinking, how is this going to solve the problem? So in that state of consciousness, you feel that this doesn't apply to me. It's not applicable. But from Narad Muni's point of view, what is it? It's 100% applicable in your situation. So for Dhruva Maharaj's mindset, he was not able to see it. And again, if you take it a step further, Narad Muni is telling him to be satisfied in that situation. Okay. And then this verse he's telling Dhruva Maharaj, it doesn't matter who they are. It doesn't matter who they are. You should follow the etiquette of when you find someone more qualified, you should be very pleased. If you find someone less qualified, you should show compassion. And when you find someone equal, you should make friendship. So what you should do is forgive Suniti, right? And you should go and make friendship with your brother Uttam. Even though you may not get your father's lap. You should go and do these things. And even if you don't get the father's lap, even if you don't get harsh words from Suruchi, you should be satisfied whether in happiness or distress. What do you think? Does that sound palatable for Dhruva Maharaj? it doesn't sound palatable to anyone in the material body. It just doesn't sound palatable. But if you take it from the Krishna conscious perspective, from the point of self-realization, it makes perfect sense. Because if you look at Dhruva Maharaj's situation, and if you look at Prahlad Maharaj's situation, in fact, when I remember reading Prahlad Maharaj's pastimes, the first time was a blur. The second time when I started reading, I remember one particular point, that Prahlad Maharaj disliked Sanda and Amarka talking about friends and enemies. He disliked it. And he focused so much on teaching his school friends not to see that distinction. And to be able to be equipoised in happiness and distress, friend or enemy. He taught this very specifically to his classmates. So Dhruva Maharaj, same age, but not of the same level of realization at this point in time, being a sadhak, showing this particular pastime. So then, how do we see this from a point of perspective of a devotee? It's very simple. In the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Krishna in the Uddhava Gita tells Uddhava that the three different types of persons, the Uttamadhikari, Madhyamadhikari, and the Kanishthadhikari. And the verse most applicable to this, if you want to apply this in your life, if you want to apply this in devotional service, then the verse that Krishna tells Uddhava is Ishvara tad adineshu balisheshu dusatsucha prema maitri kipopeksha ya karoti sapan ya karoti sa karoti ya mandhyama. So there Krishna is telling Uddhava that Ishvara tad adineshu balisheshu dusatsucha, these four persons, Madhyama is able to distinguish these four persons. Who's the first person? Ishvara, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the second one you can guess, Tad Adineshu. Say it again. Okay. Yeah. Tad Adineshu. There's okay. Balisheshu Disatsucha. Balisheshu. Innocent. Dvisatsu. Was it? Dvisa. The envious, those who are envious. In this list, I believe Tad Adineshu, there is also mentioned about devotees of the Lord. Tad and then Adineshu. So then how does a Madhyama deal with them? Prema, Maitri, Kripopeksha. Okay, so these 4 or 5 ways is mentioned. For the Supreme Lord, what do? Prema. They engage in loving devotional service. Maitri, they make friends with the devotees of the Lord. Then with the innocent, they preach to them, they show compassion. Kripa. And Upeksha. Upeksha is for the envious. They are indifferent towards them. So in this past, if you, I did a quick search of Veda base, and if you have a look at, you just type in Madhyamadhikari. There are so many references, and if you read through all of them, there are a few points Prabhupada emphasizes on a lot. Of all the points Prabhupada emphasizes, he says that the Madhyamadhikari preaches Krishna consciousness. And using this framework, using this mindset, using this consciousness, he's able to give Krishna consciousness accordingly to others. And it's mentioned, how does one go from what is a Kanishta, what is a Madhyama, what is Uttama? A Kanishta is one who's engaged in serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but is unable to see the devotees of the Lord. Unable to see the devotees of the Lord means that they're not able to recognize the devotees' exalted positions. It's for them, it's just me and Krishna, that's it. They're not able to take full shelter in the devotee association. Although they are in the association, they're not able to take full shelter of it. And one who's in the Uttamadhikari platform, such a person, he sees all living entities as parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and therefore sees them in connection with the Lord. So he feels that everyone is engaged in service of the Lord but myself. So he's of that exalted caliber. In fact, it's mentioned that just as a materialist or a businessman, he's able to, or a business person, is able to see in every situation opportunities to make money. Prabhupada gives this example. During the plague, what had happened was that one particular businessman was broke. but his friend had some money. And so he went and told him that, can you please allow me to borrow some money? And the one who had some money, the businessman, was telling him that you're a businessman. You should do something. And he gave him, this is a loan. You find out a way to make something out of this. And so the poor businessman took that loan, and then he tried to think of a way to make money. And while the plague means it's mainly spread by rats and other rodents and other vermin. So it's mentioned there that this particular businessman saw the dead rat, and he thought, if I dispose of this rat, it will prevent the plague from spreading. And in this way, I'll be able to make money by picking up all of these rats. So in some way or other, he was able to get money from picking up all of these dead rats, all of these rodents. And in this way, he was able to build his business. And he became very, very wealthy after that situation. So in the similar manner, not in the same way, in the similar manner, the devotee sees every opportunity as an opportunity to engage the material energy in Krishna's service. And this is an extremely difficult thing to do. Extremely difficult unless one is on the platform of prema, or at least reaching prema. It is extremely difficult, because on the way from what distinguishes Kanishta, Madhyama and Uttama, there are two factors. In one place, it's mentioned one's level of understanding of Shastra. And in another place, it's mentioned one's faith. Because in the sense of preaching Krishna consciousness, in the sense of keeping oneself in Krishna conscious, the Kanishta is of a lower level of understanding of Krishna consciousness. Because if one is unable to understand the devotees, how is he able to engage in devotional service? Right? Because Krishna says himself, one who is a devotee, one who is my devotee is not my devotee, but one who is a devotee of my devotee is my devotee. But if a Kanishta doesn't read this, then how will he know? So his knowledge of Krishna is incomplete. It's there, but it's incomplete. But even that level of devotion, it's very hard to achieve. Just to be able to be fixed in serving the deities. Just to be consistent in serving the Lord. To understand Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and I'll engage whatever I have in Krishna's service. Even that is a very exalted position to be in. So although we distinguish all of these positions, still Kanishtadhikari is a exalted position to be in. And so when one develops more knowledge, one becomes a Madhyama. He's able to preach Krishna consciousness, able to convince others, and they know that by associating with non-devotees, their own devotional service will go down. Whereas the Kanishta, it's mentioned, Prabhupada says in many places, the Kanishta doesn't fully accept that they may go and associate with non-devotees, and they may fall down due to their association. But a Madhyamadhikari is very careful of that. But still their knowledge of Krishna is not fully complete as that of an Uttamadhikari. And then when you take from faith perspective, you can see from Shraddha to Prema. And the Madhyama, the Kanishta, Madhyama and Uttama are in that particular order, from Shraddha all the way to Prema. In one particular place, Prabhupada describes that the Madhyama is somewhat equivalent to the platform of Bhava. Is just about to enter into Prema, then one becomes a Uttamadhikari. But that's a reference somewhere else. If you search up database, you can see it. So that's faith, and that's in one's understanding of the Shastra. One can distinguish between these levels. Now, here's a I guess you could say a curveball. If you listen to Prabhupada's Nectar of Devotion lectures, Prabhupada will talk about how one can be a pure devotee and still be a Kanishtadhikari. One can still be a pure devotee, but be a Kanishtadhikari. How does that work? What is the definition of a pure devotee? Simply put. Can anyone tell? Someone? Sorry, always thinks? Always thinks of the Lordships? Okay. We need a bit more for pure devotional service. Yeah. Yeah, ahoituki apratihata. Good. Can someone? You're right. Anyone else? Can think of anything else? What is the definition of a pure devotee? Surrendered soul. Okay. Anything more? Yeah. Yeah. Translation. Hmm. Yeah. So that pure devotional service. Mm, Prabhupada says in this particular lecture that they simply think of Krishna's pleasure. That's all. They have rejected everything else, and they're simply thinking of what I can do to please Krishna. Although their endeavor is considered to be on the platform of an Akanishta Adhikari, still they're considered pure because they're simply thinking of Krishna's pleasure. And Prabhupada even says in a different place that one who's just simply following the orders of the spiritual master, although they may not be pure, the spiritual master is pure, their instruction is pure, and therefore they're on the pure platform. So you can see here that this quality of becoming a pure devotee and these particular distinctions or gradations, they are not um, they're not I guess you could say related. They're not dependent on they're related but not dependent on one another. You can put it that way. So here this particular verse is talking about a Madhyama Adhikari because the distinction is given specifically. One who is superior to me, I show them great respect and I'm pleased because it's an opportunity for me to be able to engage in service and progress in my Krishna consciousness. When one meets one less qualified than oneself, then one feels compassionate. Not that I'm in a higher position, you're in a lower position. No, it's an opportunity to give Krishna consciousness to them so that they may become elevated. In fact, it's mentioned that the spiritual master is extremely pleased when he sees the disciples surpass him in his service. Right? So you can see how much pleasure Srila Prabhupada gave to his spiritual masters simply by preaching Krishna consciousness all over the world. Because during Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's time, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he had sent 2 disciples to England, sannyas disciples. He had sent them to England, and he told them to start the movement there. He said, build a mat there, a Gaudiya mat. And so then they went there, and then they came back. And then when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur asked them what happened, they said that we went to London, and when we went to London, no one cared for us so much. They invited us for this different place, but they looked at us differently because we were wearing, dhoti kurta. And so it would have been better if we had adopted the coat and suit. And when we explained the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, no one is able to follow. So we therefore think it's not possible to do so. And they came back. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was pleased with them because they had followed his instructions and left. But he wasn't completely satisfied because they had not fully embraced that mood and mission. And so then Prabhupada later on tells his disciples, and many of his disciples explain the contrast. Prabhupada himself sends, I believe, 4 grihasta couples to London, 4 or 5. Was it 3? Gurdas, Yamuna Mataji, Shyam Sundar Prabhu, and Ramalati Mataji. Mukunda. Okay, so there are 3. He sends 3 of them. And when he sends 3 of them to London, you have to understand, they were grihastas, they weren't sannyasis. And they preached Krishna consciousness vigorously in dhoti kurta and saris. And they didn't give up. Because if you hear about the endeavors they went through in London, they're pretty much alone, simply completely dependent on Srila Prabhupada and his instructions. And so, actually it's mentioned a few weeks prior to them going to London, Prabhupada personally trained them in everything in Krishna consciousness. In kirtan, in worshipping, in preaching Krishna consciousness, how to deal with people, everything Prabhupada taught them. And so when they went there, they became successful and Prabhupada went there. And then Prabhupada, think that's the time where they even installed the deities. They had the altar and the temple established, and later on Prabhupada came multiple times. But the point here is that Prabhupada was extremely pleased with these three Grihastha disciples of his, that they established Krishna consciousness because they had fulfilled the desire of his spiritual master, where his own god brothers could not fulfill or succeed. His disciples were able to assist. And what was Prabhupada's mood towards his disciple? That my spiritual master has sent you to assist me in fulfilling his instructions. Right? So you can see there that how pleased Prabhupada was with his disciples, how pleased his spiritual masters were pleased with him, having excelled in devotional service. So that's how one should be compassionate toward those who are less qualified. And when one meets someone equal to himself, he should make friendship with him. Of these three, what is the most difficult to do? Controlling envy, how? Which of these three? Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Mhm. Yeah, sure. To find someone greater and more qualified than than ourselves, then of course the envy is there, and we feel like it's hard to be able to be pleased and offer respects. Yes, but there's one more item here that's much more difficult to do. Can anyone think? Can anyone think? There are three options here. It's not that hard. Either your superiors, your equals, or one below. Of course, we're gonna say, one we think that less qualified than us. It's easy. That's easy, right? Then superiors, that's hard. What about one's equals? Is that difficult? You should make friendship with him. Is that difficult or is it not difficult? It's mentioned here of these three things, we take majority of our association with those who are equal-minded, our peers. And it is very difficult to be able to, Prabhupada says here, instead of being proud of one's activities, one should treat him as a friend. It is extremely difficult to curb one's pride, to be able to consider another person on the same level as oneself. Yes, instead of being, Prabhupada says here, instead of being an envious of a more qualified man, one should be jolly to receive him. Yes, that is also very difficult to perform. Because to be able to hear from such a person who is qualified, more qualified, of course, envy is in the way. But that envy is also there present in one's association with equal-minded persons. And to advance in Krishna consciousness, majority of our association comes from those on the same level as us. Association with those on the same level of us as us. Because it's not that we'll always have the association of someone greater than us. It's not always accessible for all of us. We're, like say for example, Narada Muni and meeting the Bhaktivedantas. Was he able to continuously associate with them? No, they were just there for the Chaturmasya, the 4 months. But that was enough for him to advance in Krishna consciousness, right? Yes? But then he just gave him the opportunity to be able to take up a spiritual body in his next life. But still, he associated with everyone on his platform, right? All of his brothers are exalted personality as well. Lord Shiva, an associate of him. So we can see here that yes, it is most difficult to associate with someone if you have envy, a quality of envy. But here, instead of being proud of one's own activities, one should treat one who's equal to him as a friend. Because the reason why I'm emphasizing this and not so much on the very difficult part of associating with someone who's greater than us is because this is something we can work on. This is very easily workable. That when we see a person who's senior to us, at least we will mechanically offer respect, follow with everyone. But when we're in association with devotees, which is majority of the time, what are we doing? Are we treating each other as friends, or is this nature of being proud of one's own activities, all hampering our progress in Krishna consciousness. Because if we're not able to even do these three things, it's mentioned, we won't be happy in this material world. We won't be happy within the material world unless we're able to follow these three principles. And again, I'm saying, to be able to find someone and be compassionate, Prabhupada's already given us preaching. He's already given us book distribution. He's already given us prasadam distribution. He's already given us Harinam. If we simply follow Srila Prabhupada and do these things, naturally that will be satisfied. We will naturally show proper compassion. Not that we give a few dollars to a homeless person. That we actually give proper charity, being properly compassionate. So then how are we going to be able to address these other two? That's what we shouldn't be focusing on. If there's something you can take away from here, then you can take away that Prabhupada's expecting us that when we see someone more qualified than us, rather than being envious, we should be jolly to receive them. And when we find someone on the equal platform as us, then what should we do? Rather than being proud, we should make friendship with them. We should make friendship with them. And of course, that friendship is of varying degrees according to one's association, because we're all individuals. One will be very intimate, one will be not so intimate, there'll be friendship, so on and so forth. But point is that we should not bring about this envy or this pride, nor should we bring about this, what does Prabhupada say here? We should not we should not deride those who are less qualified than us. So if we're able to avoid these things, then naturally we'll be happy in this material world. Okay, I think I'm close to time. I'll end here. So we discussed a bit about Sanatana Goswami. There was one point I wanted to mention, that later on, that when Mahaprabhu had this is the first point I was supposed to mention, that it's mentioned that the etiquette of a Vaishnava is the ornament of a devotee. That the Vaishnava etiquette is an ornament of a devotee. So it's something we wear constantly, that we always follow. And this comes in Chaitanya Charitamrita. At the point in time Mahaprabhu was in Puri with Sanatana Goswami, he told Sanatana Goswami, come meet me for lunch. And he was somewhere near the ocean, somewhere on the other side of the Jagannath Puri temple. He was in the gardens. I think he was the Jagannath Vallabha gardens or Aitota, somewhere there. And it's mentioned that Sanatana Goswami had to go and visit Mahaprabhu. He could have just gone through the main pathway and just visited Mahaprabhu. And that would have taken it's mentioned less than an hour would have visited him. But then he decided that if I go through this path, then I'm already fallen, being taken up the customs of a mlecha, of service of a mlecha. And on top of that, I have all these sores, and if I touch the servants of Jagannath who are worshipping him, it'll be a great offense. So then better I go through the long path. And that long path during midday was through the beach, during the hot burning sand. And so Sanatana Goswami decided to go through that pathway. And it's again mentioned there specifically that his bliss of thinking that I will meet Mahaprabhu and I will take lunch with him. I'm going to accept lunch invitation with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, made him forget that walking through the heat in the beach was causing blisters on his feet. That actually, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is saying, would actually cause great pain just by walking. Have you had blisters while walking? And when you walk, it just gives pain after pain after pain. But still you need to walk because you need to reach somewhere. So in the same way, Sanatana Goswami came. And Mahaprabhu was already finishing his lunch. So then he asked Sanatana Goswami what happened. And Sanatana Goswami explained the rationale, why he had gone and taken the long path. And Mahaprabhu felt great bliss. And he tells Sanatana Goswami, just see, you are the epitome of one who follows Vaishnava etiquette. You are the example. You are exemplify how a devotee should follow Vaishnava etiquette, and one who does not give up etiquette for anything else. And he says there in that situation that the Vaishnava etiquette is an ornament of a devotee. So Prabhupada's teaching us here. It may seem like, what does it talk about devotees or anything, but Prabhupada's teaching us here that if we want to be at least happy within the material world, we should do these three things. When we meet someone who is more qualified than us, we should be pleased, jolly to receive them, Prabhupada says. And when we meet someone who is less qualified than us, we should be compassionate, ready to bring them up to our platform, if not even more. And then when one meets someone equal to them, what should they do? They should show friendship. They should give up their pride that I may be good at this, I may be good at that. But one should understand all these material qualifications will not give Krishna consciousness, will not give bhakti. What will give bhakti is the pleasure of Krishna. When Krishna is pleased, he will bestow bhakti upon us through our spiritual masters. That we should remember. That is not, so what do we have to be proud of anyway? What really do we, because if it comes to it, sometimes Krishna tests us. He'll pull away all of our skills. He'll put us in a situation where we have nothing to do but to depend on other devotees. So Krishna wants us to be like this, devoid of pride. He wants us to take shelter of other devotees. We may be so expert in whatever we're doing, but still Krishna wants us to see us, how we're willing to go to the greatest extent to be able to give him pleasure. Right? And that's exemplified in Srimati Radharani, who's even willing that if she sees someone who's rendering more service and Krishna is pleased with them, she's willing to become their maidservant. So you can see that mood of humility, that mood of wanting to give Krishna pleasure. And that's what we should attain. And if we want to attain that, we need to follow the simple etiquette that's mentioned here by Srila Narad Muni. So it's close to 9. I can take maybe one question if there's any comments. Yes, Martha. I remember asking this, I forgot who I asked this to, I think it was Ganesham Prabhu, or I remember hearing also that if, association with equals, a lot of prajalpa happens. Because, when you're with someone senior, you'll speak about Krishna consciousness, right? And when you're with someone junior, you'll think, I should speak about Krishna consciousness, otherwise what they'll think of me. But when we're with equals, the other person knows you in and out. They know your good qualities, your bad qualities, everything. They've made friendships with you knowing all of those things, okay? So there's nothing you can really hide. So you can be free and everything with them. So, I remember. So at one point, it was asked, I think, that, if we associate with devotees, naturally, there's this conversation that happens. Hare Krishna Prabhu, Mataji, how are you? How's everything going? How's your family? How's everything? How can we associate with devotees giving up this prajalpa? But actually, all of this is part of loving exchange with devotees, right? Inquiring about their well-being, inquiring about their position. You see, Krishna, when he met the Brahmana that Rukmini had sent, Prabhupada makes the point that he asks the Brahmana that not what do you want? He brings the Brahmana, he feeds him, he lets him rest. When he then comes to him and massages him while he's resting, sitting down, then he asks him, how are you doing? How is your practice of your austerities? How is your Brahmanical activities going? So there Prabhupada says, you see, he didn't ask him, how's your kingdom going? He didn't ask him, how's the business going? He didn't ask him, how's your work going? He asked him according to his position. And Prabhupada says this is because he did not want to unnecessarily agitate the Brahmana by giving him all of these things that could distract him later. So even Krishna is talking in this way because there's a purpose. And the purpose is to establish a relationship, a communication. And over a period of time, what happens then, of course, there's prajalpa. And that's the level of one's Krishna consciousness. That you can't kill yourself about. Right? But when prajalpa does happen, you will know. Because naturally when one speaks Krishna consciousness, one's consciousness is elevated. One is more Krishna conscious. One is more light-hearted. One feels more inspired to serve Krishna. When prajalpa happens, generally the opposite happens. It just degrades, and you feel like, I wasted my time. If you do feel like that, or you'd feel less inspired in devotional service. So how to give up prajalpa? Then it would be more important to do devotional service with the devotees. It's more important to do some devotional service, to read with them. Because Because the more and more time you spend with the devotees in Krishna consciousness doing things, then naturally the subject matter will be like that. Yeah. So if you read something together, then later on there may be a question, there may be conversation based on that. When there's a service, then there's a question, how to do this, what is this, this looks good, this is better, I can do. Then naturally it becomes about Krishna consciousness. So we must increase the quotient of Krishna in our life. We should mold our life in such a way that we're more Krishna conscious. And so naturally it's in the beginning stage. We're getting somewhere. So naturally we have to give up our mentality of material friendship, that we talk to other people about their welfare, this, that, the other, try to get as much, squeeze as much rasa from them and then drop them and go to the next person. That we need to give up. We're in it for the long run, and so Prajalpa may be there, but then we need to develop more and more stronger relationship with Krishna, and by that strong relationship with Krishna we'll see the other person as a devotee of Krishna, and naturally we'll associate with them more, and naturally the subject matter will be more about Krishna consciousness. Hare Krishna. So I'll end here, it's past 9. Thank you very much for listening. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Shri Radha Gopinath Bhagavan ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Nitai Gaur Premanande.